I've had a lot of normal camping trips in my life, but there's one I can't forget, no matter how many years pass. Not because it was fun or beautiful, but because of how fast something can go from peaceful to tragic. This was about 9 or 10 years ago, somewhere in early summer. I was in my 20s, and a group of us, mostly friends from work, had planned a weekend camping trip in Georgia. It wasn't deep backcountry or anything like that, just a semi-developed state park with a good mix of rugged trails and drive-in tent sites. There were vault toilets, picnic tables, fire pits, and not much else. We were all just looking to unplug for a couple days. I had done a bit of camping growing up, but this was one of the first trips where I was organizing most of my own gear. I had a decent tent, a sleeping pad, a small pack stove, and the usual cooler full of snacks and beer. The others were all in a similar position, young adults with just enough outdoor knowledge to enjoy a weekend away, but not seasoned hikers or survival experts. There were 5 of us in total: me, Jared, Cole, Tasha, and Kayla. We arrived around early afternoon on a Friday, picked out 2 side-by-side campsites tucked under a big patch of trees, and got to work setting up. The weather was warm but mild, the sky was clear, and everything seemed to line up perfectly. There were only a few other campers in the park, mostly families with kids. Our sites were slightly elevated, and a small creek ran about 30 yards behind our tents. The woods stretched out in all directions, thick with pine and oak, and the only sounds were the wind and the occasional call from a bird. That first night was uneventful in the best way. We built a fire, cooked burgers on a small grill, played cards at the picnic table, and had a few drinks once it got dark. Jared had brought a little Bluetooth speaker and played some low music. Around midnight, we turned in. I fell asleep fast, lulled by the rustling trees and the crackle of dying embers. The next morning, we made coffee and went for a short hike down one of the trails that led out of camp. It wasn't strenuous, just a winding path that led through thick forest and looped back around toward the river. We passed a couple of other hikers, but mostly had the trail to ourselves. It was the kind of walk that reminded you why people go camping in the first place. Sunlight filtering through the leaves, soft ground underfoot. No traffic, no phone reception, no distractions. We got back to camp in the early afternoon, ate lunch, and spent the rest of the day hanging out by the creek. Tasha and Kayla brought hammocks and strung them up between 2 trees, while Jared skipped stones and Cole tried to nap. I sat on a rock with my feet in the cold water, just listening to everything. Wind in the branches, bugs humming, a hawk calling in the distance. It was calm, simple, the kind of day that disappears too fast. That night, we made chili in a cast iron pot and drank a little more. I remember feeling full, a little buzzed, and totally content. We talked about doing a longer hike the next day, or maybe checking out one of the nearby waterfalls we'd seen on the map. It was one of those nights where no one was in a rush, where the fire felt like the center of the world and the only clock was the stars coming out overhead. Around 11:30 or so, we all started drifting off. Tasha and Kayla went into one tent, Jared and Cole in another. I had my own tent a few feet away, set up under a big oak tree. The night air was cool, and I remember laying back in my sleeping bag thinking how quiet everything was. No cars, no city noise, just nature. I fell asleep quickly. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. At first, I wasn't even sure why I was awake. I wasn't cold, and nothing was making noise, but something didn't feel right. I stayed still for a moment, listening. The forest was too quiet. No bugs, no breeze, just silence. Then I heard it, a loud, sharp snap, like a branch breaking under pressure. Then another, sounded close. I sat up in my sleeping bag and unzipped the tent door just enough to look outside. I couldn't see much at first, just shadows and shapes. The fire had long since gone out, and the moonlight was patchy through the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, shining it outside. Everything looked normal at first. Tents, trees, coolers, but then I saw movement off to the left. I turned the beam of light in that direction and froze. The oak tree above Jared and Cole's tent was leaning. Not slightly, it was moving. It was slow, but unmistakable. The base of the tree was splitting near the ground, and the whole trunk was tilting forward. The branches above were starting to sway, and the sound of cracking would grow louder with each second. It was like something out of a nightmare. A tree falling in total silence except for the sound it made tearing itself apart. I shouted for them to wake up, but it all happened too fast. The tree came down in one sudden motion, an explosion of noise and weight. It slammed into the tent with a thud so loud it echoed through the woods. The impact was sickening. I remember the way it made the ground shudder under my feet. I ran out of my tent, flashlight bouncing, heart in my throat. The others were stumbling out of their tents, still half asleep and confused. We all ran to the collapsed tent. It was crushed, not just damaged, flattened. Branches had punched through the fabric, and part of the trunk lay across the center. Poles were snapped, the whole structure twisted and pinned. We could hear moaning from inside, but it was faint, muffled. We started trying to lift what we could, branches, limbs, the edge of the trunk, but it was useless. The tree was massive and we had no tools. Tasha ran to her car and grabbed a small hand axe. Kayla started calling 911, trying to get a signal through the trees. I kept shouting for Jared and Cole, trying to get a response, but only one of them made a sound. A low, weak groan. We worked in chaos, trying to rip fabric, shove away smaller limbs, anything to get through. Eventually, we cleared enough of the outer debris to see one of them, Jared. He was barely conscious, trapped under part of the trunk, face pale and bloody. Cole was pinned further in, and we couldn't see him clearly. Felt like time stopped. The dispatcher on the phone told us to stay calm and wait for emergency services. That help was on the way, but every minute felt like an hour. Jared's breathing was shallow. Cole wasn't making any noise at all. After what felt like forever, flashing lights came through the woods. A rescue team arrived, followed by EMTs and park rangers. They moved fast, more organized than we were. They had saws, stretchers, radios. They cleared us back and got to work, cutting through the tree, stabilizing the scene. We watched from a distance as they worked. No one spoke. Kayla was shaking. Tasha had her hands over her mouth. I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. Eventually, they pulled Jared out. He was alive but barely, with obvious internal injuries and a broken leg. They covered him with a foil blanket and got him on a stretcher. Then they got to Cole. They worked slower there, more careful, more quiet. When they finally lifted him out, I knew. The way they moved, the way they shielded him from view, the way they didn't rush. They placed him on a stretcher too, but covered him completely. We found out later that the tree had been weakened from the inside. Disease, maybe. Rot that wasn't visible from the outside. The park rangers said it probably would have fallen on its own eventually. It was just random timing that made it fall that night. Just bad luck. Cole didn't make it. Jared spent weeks in the hospital, and when he finally came home, he wasn't the same. None of us were. We'd gone out there to unwind, to disconnect from our busy lives, and in 1 second, it all flipped. A tree fell. Not because anyone was reckless. Not because we were doing something dumb. It just happened. Sometimes that's all it takes. I've camped since then, but I always do things differently now. I look at every tree around me. I check the angle of the trunks, the ground at the base, the health of the bark. I never pitch a tent near anything large enough to fall and kill me. It's not paranoia. It's just the memory of that night burned into my brain. What happened wasn't fair. It wasn't anyone's fault, but it was real. As real as the dirt under our boots and the sound of a tree breaking apart in the dark. It taught me that nature doesn't care if you're careful. It doesn't care what time it is or how good the weather looks or how much fun you were having. It just is. And sometimes something unfortunate happens and everything changes. I was maybe 15 at the time, camping with my family like we did every summer. We usually stayed at the same state park in northern Michigan, near a lake that drew in families, fishermen, and RVers all season long. There were fire pits and picnic tables and big loops for trailers and tents. We always picked a wooded spot off the inner loop, not totally secluded but quiet enough. My parents liked the routine of it, the old Coleman stove and the plastic bins of supplies we reused year after year. I liked the freedom. No school, no chores, just swimming, hiking, and doing whatever I wanted until the sun went down. That summer, I had started bringing a cheap folding knife on our trips. Nothing fancy. I picked it out from a display case at a bait shop with my dad. The blade locked, had a wood handle, and looked like the kind of thing you carried just to say you carried it. I didn't need it, but something about walking around the woods with it in my pocket made me feel older, more capable. I remember the day this all happened because it started off so normal. Blue skies, mosquitoes, the smell of bacon from someone else's grill. I'd spent most of the morning helping my dad unload gear and later walked around the lake alone. The park had lots of narrow trails that branched off from the main roads, some of which weren't marked. I'd explored most of them the past few years, usually just dead ends or spots where deer paths split into the brush. That was always my favorite part. Getting away from the hum of the campgrounds and just walking where the trees swallowed everything up. That evening, around dusk, I decided to head out again. Dinner was done. My parents were relaxing in their folding chairs, and my younger sister had already gone into the tent to read. I grabbed my flashlight and told them I was going for a walk. Nothing unusual. The trail I took was one I'd walked a few times before. It cut straight from our part of the campground through a thick patch of pine and maple and came out near the edge of a shallow creek. It wasn't a long walk, maybe 15 minutes each way, just enough to feel like you were somewhere else for a while. The light was starting to fade, but not fully dark. The trail was quiet. I moved slow, just listening to the crunch of leaves under my boots. There was no one else around, not unusual for that time. Most people were either still at their fires or winding down. I passed a few small animal holes, noticed a squirrel darting across the path. Nothing strange. It was when I reached the creek that I noticed something off. Across the narrow water, maybe 30 feet away, I saw movement in the tall grass. My first thought was deer, but then I saw her, a woman. She was crouched low, almost on all fours. Her back was turned to me, shoulders hunched, hands, or what looked like hands, planted on the ground like she was steadying herself. She wore dark clothes, pants, some kind of long-sleeved shirt, both of them stained and torn in places. Her hair was dark and loose, hanging wild down her back. First, I thought she might have been hurt. Maybe she fell or was trying to get up. But she didn't move like someone who had fallen. She rocked a little, back and forth, her head tilted to one side, then the other, slow and steady. I froze. I didn't want to call out. I didn't even want to breathe loud enough for her to hear. The first real wave of fear hit me when I realized she was barefoot. Her feet were covered in dirt, scratched up, and she wasn't wearing a backpack or carrying anything. No sign of a campsite, no trail gear. She looked like she had just walked out of the forest and stopped there to, I don't even know what. Breathe, stretch, sway. I stayed as still as I could, tried to figure out what I was looking at. Maybe she was on drugs. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she wasn't right in the head. My brain started racing through explanations, none of them comforting. She tilted her head again, sharper this time. Then she dropped all the way to her elbows and knees. Her whole body shifted, like she was getting ready to crawl, but not like a normal person. More like how an animal drops into a hunting stance. I could hear her breathing long, wheezing breaths, and then she started muttering. It was quiet at first. Random words, no structure, just sounds and phrases like bark and crawl and beneath and skin. Over and over again, not quite a whisper but not loud either. I wanted to back away, but I was scared she'd hear me. I didn't know what she'd do if she noticed me. I didn't even know if she was dangerous. But something deep in my gut told me that she wasn't okay. Then she twitched. Her arms shook, and she let out this low noise, not quite a growl, not quite a moan. Her fingers spread into the dirt. She dug them in hard. She looked like she was bracing against something inside her, something she couldn't hold back. I remember the way her spine looked under her shirt, rigid, straining, like she was trying not to come apart. Her entire body was locked in this weird tension. Then she turned her head. She didn't stand. She didn't call out. She just turned her head and looked straight at me. Her eyes were wide, the whites showing all the way around, and her mouth was slightly open. There was dirt on her face, maybe even blood on the corner of her lip. Her pupils were huge, She didn't blink, didn't say anything, just stared like she'd known I was there the whole time. I felt like I was being studied, not watched, studied, the way a predator studies something it doesn't quite recognize. That was the moment I left. I didn't run, not at first. I backed up, slow and careful, keeping my eyes on her. She didn't move, just kept staring. When I was out of sight behind the thicker trees, I turned and started walking fast. Not sprinting, but fast enough that I was sweating by the time I got back to the trailhead. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't know how to explain what I saw. I didn't even know what I'd seen. Just some woman in the woods, crawling, muttering to herself. I couldn't make it sound normal no matter how I spun it. And I didn't want them to think I was making it up. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing those whispers in my head. Random words, pieced together like they meant something. I kept seeing her back, the way it looked like something was wrong under her skin, like she was fighting off a seizure or something else worse. The next morning, I walked back out to the creek trail by myself. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I just needed to see if she was still out there. If maybe there was some evidence that she'd gone back to a normal campsite or something that made the whole thing less disturbing. There was nothing. No sign of her. No prints. No torn clothes. No trash, no sleeping bag, no trail. But in the spot where she had crouched, the dirt was torn up. Deep gouges, like from fingers or claws, and what looked like vomit mixed with spit drying in the dirt. There was a weird, musky smell in the air, like sweat and wet dog, but it faded quickly. I stood there for a while, not really thinking, just staring at that spot, trying to make sense of it. She hadn't been a monster, not literally. There was no werewolf, no transformation, but something had been wrong with her. She was real. She was flesh and blood, but she wasn't acting like any person I'd ever seen before. Something inside her was tearing her up. Whether it was drugs, psychosis, or some kind of breakdown, I don't know. But I do know this. She wasn't just lost. She wasn't just high. She was changing, not into an animal, but into something else. And I caught her mid-process. That stuck with me for years. It still does. I don't hike alone anymore. Not after dusk. Not off trail. I carry more than a cheap folding knife now, and I stay aware. Because that night showed me something I can't forget. Sometimes people are far stranger than the stories we tell about monsters. Sometimes they don't need to turn into wolves to feel just as dangerous. All it takes is a human way off course, slipping away from who they used to be. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you might be the only witness to whatever they're becoming. I was probably around 14 or 15 when this happened. My family used to go camping every summer, usually at the same state park a few hours from where we lived. It was the kind of place that felt like tradition. We always stayed in the same general area, our tent set up near the lake, not too far from the communal bathrooms, not too close to other campers. My parents had their usual setup, and I had a friend named Brian who came with us most years. His parents were friends with mine and would stay at a nearby campsite. Back then, we had a kind of routine, something we called the ritual. Every night, once it got fully dark and the parents had settled into their camp chairs or gone to bed, Brian and I would head off into the woods with our flashlights. It was never for any reason other than just to go. We'd always follow the same trail at first, a thin path that split off behind the campground and disappeared into the thick of the trees. We'd walk quietly, sometimes just talking low or staying silent. We liked the way the woods looked in the dark, and we especially liked pushing our boundaries. We'd turn our flashlights off once we were far enough away from any other light, trying to let our eyes adjust, seeing how far we could go before one of us cracked and flipped theirs back on. We never brought our phones. It wasn't really about safety or communication. We just didn't use them much while camping. No one had great service anyway, and we were kids. Our flashlights were those cheap plastic ones from the hardware store, the kind you fed AA batteries and hoped wouldn't die mid-walk. This night started like all the others. Our parents were wrapping up by the fire, and we waited until the last grown-up call to don't go too far before heading off. The air was cooler than usual, and there had been some light rain earlier in the day, so the ground still smelled damp. Everything felt quieter than normal. Even the insects seemed to be less active. We joked about it as we walked, saying maybe the rain scared them off, or maybe everything was just asleep. But I remember the silence more than anything. It didn't feel like night sounds. It felt like waiting. We got about a quarter mile in before turning our lights off. We liked to make it a challenge. We'd walk in the dark for as long as possible, only using our flashlights if one of us tripped or heard something weird. That night, we were planning to go further than we normally did. It wasn't something we announced to each other. We just had that unspoken feeling of pushing the boundary a bit more than usual. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe we were just getting older and cockier. But we passed our usual turnaround point, a thick stump just before the trees really started getting dense, and we kept walking. The trail started narrowing the deeper we got, the packed dirt giving way to scattered leaves and thin roots that snaked across the ground. We didn't talk much, just walked. The moon was out, but mostly hidden behind clouds. We'd take a few steps, stop, listen, then go again. The woods felt different that night, like they had more weight. Not dangerous exactly, but heavier. The trees seemed bigger, the shadows thicker. We were probably about half a mile from the nearest campsite, well off the main trails, when we heard it. A whisper, just behind us. Not loud, not aggressive, just soft. It was one of those moments where we both stopped instantly and looked at each other like, "Did you hear that?" Before either of us said anything, our flashlights clicked on and we spun around. Nothing, just the trees, the trail we came from, the dead leaves and brush glowing white under our beams. Nothing moved, no wind, no small animals.
No crackling twigs.
We stood like that for a while, turning our lights this way and that. My heart was beating faster than it should have, and I could tell Brian felt the same. We laughed it off quietly, both trying to seem casual. Probably just the wind, maybe a squirrel. The woods echo sometimes. That's what we told ourselves. So we kept walking, slower now. Our flashlights stayed on. Maybe another 10 minutes passed, and then we heard it again. Same sound, soft whispering, behind us. Only this time it was closer. We froze. It wasn't like anything we'd heard before. Not animals, not leaves. This was human, but it didn't sound like someone talking to us. It was like someone muttering to themselves. Strings of words that didn't make sense, random and disconnected, as if the person wasn't aware we were even there. We turned around again, both lights up. Still nothing at first. The trees just stood there. I started scanning the lower parts of the trunks, under the low-hanging branches. That's when I saw movement. She was crawling. A person, female, crawling on the ground slowly. Like a toddler, except too stiff, too mechanical. She wasn't on her hands and knees, more like slinking forward, dragging herself. Her clothes were dark and torn. Her arms and face were covered in dirt. Her hair was matted and hanging in front of her face. She kept whispering random words. None of them made any sense. It was just a flow of broken speech. Sometimes it was phrases like paper wall or the blue sleeps. Just nonsense. We didn't say anything. We just stood there with our lights on her, not knowing what to do. It was like my brain didn't want to believe it was real. Then she noticed us. She looked up and paused. For a second, she didn't move at all. Her eyes looked wild, glassy, totally lost. Then slowly she stood. She looked at both of us and started saying she was looking for her campsite. She didn't even seem scared. It was like she didn't understand how weird the situation was. At this point, my legs were shaking. I remember Brian taking a small step back, but we didn't run. I don't know why. It wasn't bravery. It was confusion. She wasn't threatening exactly, but she was still terrifying. The way she stood, the way she talked, the way she seemed completely unaware of how far off the trail she was. It didn't make any sense. We ended up walking with her back toward the main campground. We didn't speak much during that walk. She muttered to herself the whole time, kept asking where the bathroom was, then changing her story. Sometimes she said she was looking for her tent. Other times she just started humming. I remember she kept trying to walk off the trail, like she was drawn to random spots in the trees. We had to keep her on the path, almost like guiding a sleepwalker. It took a long time to get back to the area with the main fire pits and picnic tables. The lights from other campsites finally came into view, and I felt this wave of relief hit me like a wall. Once we were back where other people could see us, things felt a little more normal. Not safe exactly, but less nightmarish. We tried to help her find her campsite, walking around the loops of tents and RVs, looking for anyone who recognized her. Eventually, after maybe 15 or 20 minutes, someone stepped out of an RV and called out her name. He looked confused, but not panicked. We asked if she was okay, and he just said something about her wandering off earlier. He didn't even seem that concerned. Turns out she had gone looking for the bathroom after drinking too much. According to the guy, she had been partying a little hard and probably got lost on the way back. He laughed about it, said it wasn't the first time she'd done something like that. I remember being stunned. She had been almost a full mile from the campgrounds, crawling, talking to herself, covered in dirt, and her group hadn't even noticed. Brian and I went back to our tent after that. We didn't do the ritual the rest of that trip. Lying in my sleeping bag that night, I thought about how close she came to spending the entire night lost in the woods. If we hadn't pushed ourselves to go farther than normal, we never would have seen her. She could have passed out in the dirt, wandered deeper, gotten hurt, or worse. And the weird part was her friends didn't even care. For weeks after that, I kept thinking about her face, the way she looked up at us from the dirt, how random her words were. It didn't feel like someone just drunk. It felt like someone totally unhinged, and we were just two kids alone out in the woods with her. It taught me something about how quickly things can turn bad when you're out there. I never stopped camping after that, but I did stop walking into the woods at night without a real reason. The dark felt different after that, less like a game, more like something you should respect. Because there are things out there, not monsters, not ghosts, but real people, real dangers. And sometimes they crawl out of the shadows whispering nonsense, lost in a way that has nothing to do with the trail. I'm not easily shaken. After years of working as a safari guide in South Africa's Lowveld, you get used to the sounds of the bush, the long, quiet stretches between excitement, and the potential danger hiding behind every tree or patch of grass. You learn to read tracks, interpret calls, respect distance. You learn where not to step, when to move, and most importantly, when to stay completely still. There's a rhythm to this job, and once you're in it, you don't really think of wild animals as wild in the same way tourists do. You think of them as part of the environment, predictable even in their own instinctive way. That rhythm usually keeps you safe. But one night, the bush broke the rhythm. It was winter, deep winter. In the Lowveld, that means cold nights and dry, crisp air. The grass browns and stiffens, the watering holes shrink, and even the insects go quiet. The daytime temperatures stay decent, sometimes even warm, but after sundown, the mercury drops hard. That week, we were camped out in a remote corner of a private game reserve near Kruger. No tourists with us this time, just me, my buddy Luke, and two other staff from the lodge doing some backtracking reconnaissance for an upcoming bushwalk route. We weren't in any permanent tented camp or platform. We'd hiked in with lightweight dome tents, thin foam mats, and sleeping bags rated for the cold but nothing luxurious. Our tents were simple, two-pole canvas shelters with zippered doors, no floor, and no added insulation. Just enough to block the wind and give you a little protection from whatever decided to snoop around at night. It was the kind of camping I'd done dozens of times, comfortable enough if you knew what to expect, and rugged enough that it kept your senses sharp. That night, we'd done the usual. Circled the fire, cooked simple food, pap, borwers, and onions, and talked through our plans for the next day. We'd seen a few elephants spoor that afternoon and heard jackals far off. We'd also seen lion tracks, but not fresh ones. Older, a few days, maybe more. Nothing to worry about. By 10 p.m., the fire was down to embers, and the four of us had zipped ourselves into our respective tents. Mine was set up just off the edge of the clearing, near a stand of short mopane trees. The stars were out, and the air had dropped to near freezing. I crawled into my sleeping bag, fully dressed, with socks and beanie on, trying to get as warm as I could before my body heat worked its way into the lining. The bush was still. Not quiet, never quiet, but still. I heard a scops owl calling, then distant rustling, probably a diker, then nothing for a long stretch. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke up again, but something had changed. At first, I thought it was just the cold waking me up. My back felt especially cold and stiff, like the warmth in my sleeping bag had shifted wrong. But then I noticed that my body wasn't lying the way it had when I drifted off. I had rolled slightly in the night, and now my back was pressing into the canvas wall of the tent. Nothing unusual, except it wasn't cold. It was warm, very warm, and not in a comforting way. More like body heat, not mine. Something on the other side of the canvas. Something large, still, and radiating slow, steady warmth. My back was flush against it through the thin tent fabric. My first thought was that one of the others had come over in the night and was leaning against the tent as a joke. Maybe messing with me, but the second that thought passed, I dismissed it. No one would do that. Not here. Not at this hour. Not out in the bush, miles from anything. I didn't move right away. I just laid there, heart starting to thump a little faster, breath shallow. I was trying to listen, trying to sense anything else, movement, breathing, sound. But all I felt was that heat against my back. And the weight, the slight sag of the canvas, pulled tight from the outside by whatever was leaning against it. My mind raced. A hyena? A warthog? A bush pig, maybe? Could a leopard lie this still? Was it sleeping? Then, before I could even form a real plan, I heard a whisper from outside, coming from Luke's tent. His voice was low, trembling slightly, almost hard to hear. He said my name, my guide name, what we all called each other in the field, like a question. Soft, uncertain. The Africa bug? Are you awake? I should have stayed quiet. Should have read his tone for what it was. Should have known better. But something in me, pride maybe, or some leftover confidence from years of sleeping in the wild, made me answer without thinking. I said, strong and clear, yeah, I'm awake. And the thing against my back moved. I didn't see it. I didn't need to. I felt the shift, the weight lifting, the way the heat slipped away in an instant, like a blanket being pulled off. There was a scuffle of paws against the dry dirt, and then the unmistakable sound of something big, very big, bounding away in heavy, low, rhythmic thuds. I froze. So did Luke. Then I heard him unzip his tent slowly, whispering a soft curse under his breath. I didn't move until first light. When the sun came up, we all stood in a tight little group around my tent. The canvas still held a faint, greasy impression on the outside wall. You could see where the thing had laid against it, fur rubbed into the fabric. Coarse, short, and light brown. We found the tracks a few feet away, clear, fresh, and unmistakable. Big round pads, no claw marks, lion, big male. The prince led out of camp, circled the clearing once, then vanished into the bush toward the ridge line. From the depth and spacing, he'd been moving slow at first, then faster once I'd spoken. He hadn't stalked, he hadn't roared, he hadn't growled, just lay down next to my tent like it was nothing, like it was the warmest spot on a cold winter night. I must have rolled in my sleep and pressed my back into the wall, right into him. Just thin canvas and half an inch of air between my spine and the ribs of a fully grown predator. We didn't find any other signs of aggression. No torn tents, no rummaged gear. The lion had passed through, stopped to rest against the warm side of the canvas, then left when disturbed. But that wasn't the part that stuck with me. What hit me later, as I replayed the night in my head, was how completely silent he had been. No footfalls.
No breathing. No growl.
Just heat and weight and stillness. It was one of the only times in my life I felt truly defenseless in the bush. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I didn't have time to do anything. If the lion had decided not to leave, if it had clawed through the canvas, or pressed harder, or reacted differently to the sound of my voice, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. There's no way to fight back against that kind of closeness. No knife or rifle would have helped. I was asleep. He was right there. We didn't finish our trip as planned. We stayed one more night because we didn't want to panic or disrespect the bush by fleeing, but none of us slept much. I lay awake, watching the canvas ripple with every breath of wind. listening for steps, sniffing sounds, anything. But the lion never came back. Back at the lodge, the others joked about it. Called me Lion Pillow. Asked if I'd gotten a good night's rest. It was funny in the way that things are funny only after you survive them. But in private, when it was just me and Luke later that week, he said he'd known something was wrong even before I answered. Said he'd woken up to the sound of breathing near my tent. Deep, slow breaths, so deep he thought it was a cow at first, except there were no cows out here. That was why he asked if I was awake. Not to joke, not to mess around, but because he wasn't sure what he was hearing, and it scared him. Since that night, I've always treated every tent wall as just what it is, a suggestion, not a shield. A flap of fabric doesn't separate you from the wild. It just hints at a boundary. But nature doesn't care about boundaries, and lions don't ask permission to share your warmth. I still guide, still sleep out in the bush, still zip my tent closed and listen to the sounds of the night. But I never forget that morning. I never forget how close death can be without making a sound. And I never answer too loudly in the dark. I've always liked the quiet of the bush. There's something different about being surrounded by trees, dry earth, and nothing else for miles. It doesn't feel like loneliness, it feels like space. Like the world is just pressing pause for a while. Maybe that's why I started doing solo camping trips. No one to wait for, no one to rush you. You walk when you want, sleep when you want, sit still for hours if you feel like it. I never minded the silence. I actually liked it. The bushland I was in on this particular trip was maybe 3 hours out of town, in a region I won't name for my own peace of mind. It wasn't a designated campground, just a patch of fairly remote bush I'd been to before, not fenced, no bathrooms, no picnic tables. You had to park off a dirt road and hike in a couple 100 meters to get to the flat clearing I liked. Nothing fancy, just a good spot, open enough to see around you, but surrounded by gums and paper barks for cover. The ground was dry and uneven with leaf litter, sticks, bark, and some exposed root here and there. Plenty of natural noise, the kind that tells you when something's moving nearby. That's partly why I liked it. It was late spring, still cool at night, warm during the day with not too many flies yet. I hiked in late afternoon, no rush, carrying my usual gear. A small tent, sleeping mat, a backpack with water, canned food, a folding knife, a lighter, and a small LED lantern. I brought a collapsible stove, but didn't even bother setting it up that first night. I wasn't planning to stay more than a night or two. I just needed to switch off for a while, breathe bush air, maybe sketch a little. I pitched the tent near the edge of the clearing, the same exact spot I'd used before. No signs anyone else had been there recently, no boot prints, no cuttings, no rubbish. Just dry leaves and the gentle creak of trees moving in the wind. That first evening passed like they usually do. I sat on my little foam stool, ate a tin of cold chicken, jotted in my notebook, watched the sky darken. When the sun went down, the cool crept in fast. You could hear small things moving in the undergrowth, bandicoots maybe, possums, or just lizards shuffling across bark. All part of the normal rhythm. I didn't build a fire. There was no real need for it, and I wasn't trying to signal my presence either. I kept my light low, zipped into the tent by 9 p.m., and lay there for a while listening to the sounds. You can usually tell what's around you if you've done this enough. Skittering sounds are small. Heavy sounds are rare. Crunches through dry bark are always worth paying attention to. But nothing big came close that night. Just a distant owl now and then. Wind across the top canopy. A few leaves knocking together. Felt normal, unremarkable. I drifted off. At some point deep into the night, I woke up. There wasn't a specific reason at first. Just that off feeling, like your body knows something's changed before your brain does. It wasn't a dream that did it. I hadn't been sweating or panicking. I just opened my eyes inside the tent and knew something was different. Still pitch black out. Still quiet. But quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Then I heard a sound. Plop. It wasn't loud, but it was close. And more than that, it was distinct. It wasn't the soft shuffle of an animal walking through litter, or a branch creaking, or a leaf landing. It was A single object dropping, like something fell from a low height and landed heavily in one spot. A heavy thud like raw meat landing on dry dirt. Then silence again. I waited, listened. Nothing else moved. I unzipped my sleeping bag slightly and sat up, quiet as I could. The tent was still sealed. I hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard anything coming or going. Just that one sound. My first thought was maybe a possum had knocked something out of a tree. Or maybe something dropped a piece of half-eaten prey. I've seen that before. You get all kinds of random animal behavior in the bush, but it didn't sit right. There were no other noises. Nothing retreating. Nothing brushing against bark. Just one solid plop, then dead silence. Not even wind now, just still. I didn't sleep much after that. Eventually, I dozed off again for maybe another hour or two, until the sky lightened and the first faint blue glow pushed through the trees. That's when I unzipped the tent and looked outside. And that's when I saw it. About 2 feet from the side of the tent, resting slightly tilted in the leaves, was the severed head of a kangaroo. No body, no blood trail, just the head. It had clearly been removed from the rest of the animal with force. Not neatly. The neck was torn in places but also hacked in others, like whoever did it had used both ripping and cutting. The eyes were cloudy. The ears were stiff. There were flies beginning to gather. And I swear to this day it was not there when I set the tent up. I would have noticed. You don't miss something like that. And it wasn't dragged in. There were no drag marks.
No scuffs. No scattered prints.
Just the head, dropped cleanly onto a patch of dead leaves right near where I'd been sleeping. Everything in me went cold. I stood there barefoot, staring at it, brain half frozen, trying to piece together what I was looking at. It wasn't just gross. It wasn't just unsettling. It was wrong. It was intentional. Whatever had done this hadn't just killed something and left it. It had brought the head to my tent, dropped it close enough to be seen the second I stepped out. And it had done it silently, which meant it was a person. There's no other explanation. Predator animal doesn't do that. It doesn't cleanly remove a head and deposit it next to a tent without a sound. A dingo doesn't do that. A goanna doesn't. Nothing in the bush behaves that way naturally. This was placed. I scanned the tree line. Nothing.
No chaps.
No movement. Just pale bark and shadows. But that feeling, that gut-level alarm, it was screaming. This wasn't just a threat. It was a message I didn't understand and didn't want to try and decode. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't write anything in my notebook. I didn't even properly pack. I shoved everything into my pack as fast as I could, ripped down the tent with half the pegs still in the ground, jammed it all into my arms and started walking fast, almost jogging back to the car. The walkout wasn't long, but it felt endless. Every sound made me twitch. Every branch snap made me spin around. I kept expecting to see someone behind me. I don't even remember if I zipped my backpack or just let it swing open. I got to the car, threw everything in the back, locked the doors, and didn't start breathing right until I'd driven 5 kilometers back toward the highway. Even now, years later, I don't have a real answer. Maybe it was some unhinged hunter. Someone messing with people for kicks. Maybe they'd seen my light or heard my movement and decided to mess with me. But that would have meant they were out there, walking silently, carrying a severed animal head through the bush at 2 or 3 in the morning, just waiting for someone to find it. I never saw anyone, never heard anything beyond that one sound. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. Someone had to approach my tent in the dead of night, in dry bushland littered with noisy leaves and twigs, get within 2 feet of my head, drop a kangaroo's head on the ground, and leave again without a sound. And if they could do that, they could have done anything else. They didn't want to hurt me. Not then. If they had, they could have. I was asleep. I was alone. They were there. But they wanted me to know they were there. That's worse in some ways. I haven't been back to that spot since. I still camp. I still go out into the bush alone. But I pick different places now. Places I can see further. Places closer to other people. I still love the silence, the space, the dirt under my boots. But now I sleep a little lighter. I never leave food or gear outside. I never skip setting up a perimeter light. And I never shake that feeling that out there, just beyond the tree line, someone watched me sleep once, and they let me leave. I've spent years guiding people through the bush. South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, you name it, I've walked it. You get to a point in this work where you're almost more comfortable out there than in town. You learn the sounds, the scents, the rhythm of a healthy savanna or thicket. You know what to listen for and, maybe more importantly, what doesn't belong. And then there are nights that break all your sense of order. Nights that remind you that it doesn't matter how long you've been out here, you're still soft-skinned, fragile, and sometimes just lucky. This was during one of our winter trail expeditions, mid-July. It was that bitter time of year in the Lowveld where daytime is still manageable, even pleasant in the sun. But once it dips past sunset, it becomes cold enough to bite. We were doing a 3-day guided walk, where guests carry light packs and sleep in basic dome tents. We pitch ourselves each night in different wild spots. This particular evening was our second night out. We'd had a clean walk that day, tracks from hyena, zebra, and a bull elephant earlier in the morning. No close calls, just dry trails and quiet wind through yellow grass. We'd chosen a flat clearing near a bend in a dry riverbed to camp. There were low shrubs and mopane trees nearby, and plenty of open sky above us. We got in late afternoon, built a small fire, prepped our simple camp dinner, and briefed the guests as usual. No wandering from camp at night, no food in tents, always zip your tent all the way down. The guests, 4 of them, all international, went to sleep around 9. I sat by the fire with my assistant, Peter, going over notes for the next day. Around 10, we killed the fire down to glowing coals and crawled into our tents. I was in a 2-man dome tent alone. No fancy cot, no thick mattress. Just a foam pad, my sleeping bag, and a small gear bag as a pillow. I remember zipping my tent closed and bundling myself deep into the bag. My breath fogged up in front of me, even inside the tent. That kind of cold that makes your hands go stiff if you don't tuck them deep inside the bag. The kind where the silence outside feels thick. I lay on my side, back toward the tent wall, and tried to sleep. I must have dozed off for a while, because the next thing I remember was waking up to a weird kind of warmth behind me. My sleeping bag was warm enough, but now my lower back, where it pressed against the wall of the tent, was almost hot. It didn't feel right. Not internal warmth, external. At first, I thought maybe the fire had sparked back up or someone had brought embers too close. I blinked, adjusted my position slightly, and that's when I felt pressure. Not a lot, just the tiniest give in the tent wall, something pressing into it from the outside. Not hard, not aggressive, just contact, presence. It was heavy, and it wasn't moving much. I went still. I didn't move my head or arms. I didn't make a sound. My brain was trying to play catch-up, racing to identify what I was feeling. I had my back to the tent wall, and behind that canvas, something alive was leaning into me. Now, out there, the big 5 are never far from mind. But even then, the chances of something lying down beside a tent are slim. Most wild animals don't like the smell of tents, or people, or the nylon itself. But there it was, some animal inches from my body, only separated by a few millimeters of material. The weight of it was steady. Its warmth was real. The wall of the tent was pressing against the curve of my back. Whatever it was had bedded down right next to me, probably to get warm. I stayed frozen, eyes wide in the dark. I started going through the list in my head. Couldn't be a kudu. They wouldn't get that close. Not a hyena, too fidgety, they don't rest against tents. Not an elephant, too big and the heat was too low. Then I thought maybe a young buffalo. Maybe it wandered off, found the warmth of the tent, and decided to rest. But that didn't sit right either. Buffalo are cautious in the dark, nervous. I've seen them circle camp before but never bed down against a structure. Then came the deep part of me, the part that's learned to trust quiet instincts, and that part said lion. I didn't hear breathing, which felt odd. But the mass, the warmth, the stillness, it all pointed toward a big predator. One that wasn't afraid. One that didn't mind sharing warmth, even if it didn't fully realize what it was pressing against. I stayed perfectly still, not daring to breathe too loud. Then, from another tent maybe 10 meters away, I heard Peter's voice. Not loud, not panicked, just a strained whisper. He said my name just once, like he was checking. I didn't answer, not right away. I should have kept quiet, waited. But out of reflex, maybe pride, maybe a misplaced sense of control, I replied. And I didn't whisper. I said, "Yeah." The second the word left my mouth, the animal shifted. It didn't jump, didn't roar. It stood up, and the tent wall popped back into place as the weight vanished. I could hear the soft thud of paws, slow at first, then faster. Dry grass rustling, a low grunt, then nothing. Silence again. I stayed in my bag for at least another hour without moving. Didn't even roll over. I didn't dare unzip the flap. My heart was hammering. My body was tense and sweating under the sleeping bag even though the air outside was freezing. When light finally broke over the horizon, I slowly sat up, unzipped the tent, and looked around. Peter was already out, pale and wide-eyed, pointing toward the side of my tent. The others were still inside theirs. We found the tracks right away. Large, round prints, almost no claws showing. Lion, male from the size, likely a mature adult. The prints led from the edge of the bush toward the camp, circled around my tent, stopped where the canvas had bowed out during the night, and then continued off back toward the dry riverbed. That was it.
No més.
No damage, no sign of aggression, just a very large predator, using the warmth of a human body and tent wall to take the edge off a brutal winter night. I found the faintest smear on the tent fabric, a light patch of short hair left behind where he must have been pressed up close. The same way my house cat used to curl against me when it was cold. It was that thought that hit me hardest. The way it reminded me of something gentle and domestic, something familiar, something harmless. But it wasn't harmless. If I had startled, if I had moved the wrong way, if I had rolled too hard in my sleep or brushed a hand against the fabric or sneezed, that lion wasn't there to hunt me. I know that. He wasn't stalking or circling or testing the camp for weaknesses. He just wanted warmth. He wanted what any living thing wants on a freezing night, a place to rest. But it didn't change the fact that he could have killed me in less than a second. That the line between alive and dead, out here, is thinner than you think. Sometimes as thin as the wall of a tent. We briefed the guests later that morning, after packing camp and moving on. Told them a large male lion had passed through the area, but we didn't go into detail. No point in rattling them. They'd slept through it anyway. Back at the lodge 3 days later, I cleaned my gear, aired out the tent, and scrubbed the fabric where the smear had been. But I never got rid of that mental image. Me curled up inside my sleeping bag, breathing deep, with a 400-pound lion pressed against the outside, just enjoying my body heat. A giant cat looking for a cuddle. Since then, I've made a habit of checking the tent perimeter more thoroughly. I double layer my insulation now so I never need to sleep with my back against the canvas. I pack hot water bottles if it's going to be near freezing. I give myself space between me and the edge of the shelter. But I never stopped camping, never stopped guiding. If anything, it deepened my respect for the balance we pretend to have with nature. Because the truth is, no matter how much experience you have, no matter how prepared you think you are, sometimes you're just lucky. That lion didn't want to hurt me, but if he had, he wouldn't have needed more than a second to change the story. That night reminded me that no matter how confident you are in the wild, you're still part of the food chain, even when the predator just wants to snuggle. Back in high school, we thought we were invincible. There were 4 of us, all 17, full of energy, too much pride, and just enough gear to get by. We'd been planning the trip for a while. It was going to be our big weekend. No parents, no teachers, just us, our packs, and as far out into the woods as we could get before the sun dropped. The area we picked was up in the Blue Ridge, far enough out that you couldn't just call for help if something went wrong. We weren't stupid exactly. We had food, water, a basic med kit, a topo map, and enough sense to set up camp before it got dark. But we weren't cautious either. We thought the remoteness made it better, cooler, more real. We parked the car at a half-forgotten trailhead that wasn't even marked properly anymore. It was mid-autumn, early November. Dry leaves already coated the forest floor. The air was cold and damp. You could see your breath by the time we got past the first few switchbacks. We didn't care. The sky was clear and we were laughing the whole way up. Took most of the day to hike in. The trail was long, winding up and down between ridgelines, crossing dry creeks, climbing into thick patches of trees where the sunlight barely made it to the ground. We kept going until we found a decent clearing, flat enough for tents, close to a little stream, and far enough off the trail to feel isolated. That's what we wanted. Isolation. By the time we dropped our packs and started unpacking, the sun was already sinking low, filtering through the bare branches in a dusty orange haze. We set up two-person tents, gathered sticks for a fire, boiled some water, and shoved down half-cooked instant noodles. I remember feeling that kind of ache in my legs that you only get from hiking uphill with a pack, sharp, tired, but satisfying. After we ate, we sat around the fire for a while. Just 4 kids in baggy hoodies, talking crap, throwing leaves into the flames to watch them spark. At some point, the temperature dropped hard and the fire started dying down. We were all pretty much drained by then. It wasn't even midnight when we called it and crawled into our tents. The night air was cold. Even through my sleeping bag, I could feel it seeping in. There was no breeze, just still air and the rustle of dry leaves under small feet. You could hear the occasional scurry of a squirrel or chipmunk, sometimes an owl far off. Forest sounds, natural stuff. I lay there on my back, headlamp off, letting my body relax into the cold, hard ground. At some point, I drifted off. Then something woke me. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't the cold. It was sound, crunching, not fast, not a single scurry. A slow, deliberate crunch like weight pressing down on dry leaves. I lay still, eyes open in the dark. Another crunch, then another, then more. At first, I thought it might just be a raccoon or 2 moving around, maybe sniffing for food scraps. But the steps didn't stop. They got closer, and more of them. It wasn't just a couple of noises anymore. It was many, and they weren't random. The steps were slow, measured, like things moving together, all around us. My heart started pounding. I could feel it in my throat, in my chest, in my hands. The tent fabric was thin. I could hear every movement. 1 step, then another, then 2 more behind us, then a faint rustle to the side, then silence, then another step directly in front of the tent flap. They weren't circling fast, just drifting, surrounding. I couldn't hear breathing, couldn't hear grunts or snorts, just that slow, rhythmic crunch of footsteps, all around. My mind started racing. I thought of bears, or coyotes, or God forbid people. Something about the way they were moving felt too coordinated, too fluid. It was like they knew exactly where they were placing their feet. I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait. I needed to see, needed to know what was out there. I slowly reached for my flashlight, gripping it tight with both hands like it was a weapon. Took a deep breath, and unzipped the tent flap just an inch. Darkness. Then I turned the light on and shoved the beam through the gap. What I saw froze me in place. Eyes, dozens of them. Big, glassy, yellow-white reflections shining back at me from all around the tent. They were high off the ground, not close to the dirt like a raccoon or fox. These were tall, most of them eye level or higher, silent, unmoving. At first, the light only caught a few pairs, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw more. To the left, behind trees, between trunks, just staring. The bodies behind the eyes were impossible to make out fully, just shapes behind the shine. But then one shifted slightly and I caught it in the beam. It was a deer, a full-grown whitetail buck, heavy, still, with its ears upright and alert, staring directly into the beam of my flashlight. And it wasn't alone. Another deer stood beside it, then 2 more just behind them. The herd, maybe a dozen or more, was standing still in the dark, completely silent, eyes locked on us. It didn't make sense. I've seen deer hundreds of times before. They're skittish. They scatter when you make noise, especially when a flashlight hits them. But these weren't running. They weren't moving at all. Just standing there, completely quiet, barely blinking. It was unnatural. I turned off the flashlight and sat there in the dark, heart racing, hands shaking. The crunching didn't return. No more movement, just that static presence, unseen but felt, like the whole forest had gone still with them. Eventually, slowly, I backed away from the flap, zipped it shut again, and lay down on my back, staring up at the fabric of the tent ceiling. I didn't sleep much the rest of that night. Sometime in the early morning, just as the sky started to lighten, I heard them move again. Faint steps, cracking twigs, the soft brush of something pushing through undergrowth. One by one, the sounds faded. When I finally stepped outside at first light, the woods looked normal. Pale blue morning sky, soft shafts of sun slicing through the branches, frost on the fallen leaves. But the ground around the tent was covered in tracks. Big hoof prints, dozens of them, deep, overlapping, pressing into the soft spots near the roots. Not random like a wandering animal. They were in a wide, uneven circle around our campsite, especially tight near the front of our tent. My friends came out groggy, yawning, stretching. I don't even think they noticed the tracks. They started breaking down camp, joking about breakfast and cold fingers. I didn't say anything. I kept quiet as we packed up, as we hoisted our packs, as we followed the trail back to the car. Part of me thought it sounded stupid. Deer aren't dangerous. Everyone knows that. What was I going to say? The deer stared at me weird, and it creeped me out, but I kept thinking about the silence. That long stretch of time where a dozen wild animals stood perfectly still, surrounding a group of sleeping kids, and didn't make a single noise. They weren't curious. They weren't grazing. They were watching, and that's what stuck with me. I've been camping a lot since then, in deserts, in canyons, along rivers and on ridgelines, but I've never experienced anything quite like that night again. I've seen deer sprint across trails, bolt from rustling bushes, freeze for a moment before leaping into the brush, but I've never seen a herd act like that. So calm, so silent, so present. I don't know why they were there. Maybe it was just strange coincidence. Maybe we'd pitched our tent right where they like to sleep or move through. Maybe it was mating season and we got too close. Or maybe they were watching for something else. But all I know is this. If I hadn't looked out that night, if I hadn't seen the eyes and the stillness and the way they all stared with that quiet intensity, I would have chalked the whole thing up to a bad dream. Instead, it became one of those memories that sits deep in your chest. Not terrifying, not dangerous, just unsettling. A reminder that when you're out there, really out there, you're not alone. And sometimes the woods watch back. There's something different about camping at night when the fire gets low. You start the evening laughing, talking, throwing sticks in the flames, thinking it'll last forever. But eventually the energy fades. The fire shrinks down to a low, dull flicker, your body cools off, and the woods around you start to stretch in strange ways. Shadows move differently. Every rustle sounds like something bigger than it probably is. You lose the buzz of noise you'd gotten used to, and then it's just silence again. That's where we were around 2 a.m. There were 5 of us, all in our 20s, camping deep in a forest reserve on a long weekend. It wasn't a campground. No picnic tables, no ranger stations. Just flat dirt surrounded by dense woods, 2 tents set back from a wide ring of stones where we had built the fire. We'd hiked in about a mile or 2 from the closest trailhead. Nobody else was out there. That's what made it nice. We'd spent the evening cooking sausages on sticks, drinking cheap beer, talking about nothing important. Around midnight, one of the guys drifted off to his tent. Then another. By 1:30 a.m., only 3 of us were left awake. Me, my buddy Tom, and his cousin Jake. We weren't talking much anymore, just watching the flames shrink, poking the coals now and then. Tired but not ready to crawl into the cold tent just yet. The fire was getting low, mostly orange embers with a few flickering tongues of flame licking up now and then. It was still enough to see a few feet out in every direction. Beyond that, everything was pitch black.
No mon.
Just shadows and tree trunks and silence. Then we heard something, a rustle, just off to the left. Faint, quick, All three of us froze. Then another rustle. To the right this time, crunching dry leaves. Not a big sound, but not a twig either. It wasn't the wind, there wasn't any. It wasn't a squirrel in the trees either. This was on the ground, low and fast. We grabbed our flashlights and swept the edges of the campsite. Nothing, just trees, leaves, and more silence. Another noise, behind us this time, closer. We all stood up slowly, scanning the darkness. That's when it came. At first, it was just a blur. A tiny shape shooting out from the dark woods like it had been flung. It ran full speed across the edge of the clearing, curved hard, and bolted straight toward the fire. We barely had time to react. I remember hearing one of us yell something, I don't even know who, and then it happened. The thing, small and low to the ground, didn't slow down. It went straight into the fire pit, straight into the glowing embers. There was a soft thud, then a sizzle. The sound was so unnatural, wet and sharp at the same time. It hissed like meat hitting a hot grill, and there was a faint crackle of burning fur. The smell hit us a second later, an awful sour mix of singed hair and something deeper, like cooked meat and rot. It was a mole, a small one, maybe 5 inches long. Its gray-black fur was matted and curling in the heat. It didn't move once it hit the coals, just lay there, twisted, with its limbs tucked up under it, smoke curling off its body. We were frozen. For maybe 10 seconds, none of us said a word. We just stared at the fire like it was some kind of trick, like we hadn't just seen a living animal sprint into its own death. The smell got worse, that wet, burnt scent rising into the cold air, curling into our clothes. I backed up from the fire. So did the others. My stomach turned hard. We didn't say anything. We just slowly started putting out the fire, one scoop of dirt at a time. Not carefully, not methodically, just to kill the smell, to stop the smoke, to erase what had just happened. The mole's body disappeared under the ash and dirt as we covered it. That was it. Nobody had any jokes. Nobody had anything to say. The night had changed. That sense of being alone in the woods, far from people, far from anything familiar. It went from peaceful to suffocating. We went to bed not long after that. I didn't sleep much. I don't think any of us did. The next morning, we got up to a heavy fog hanging low over the trees, damp and cold. The fire pit was just a black smear in the ground, and the area where the mole had landed was now a crusty patch of gray and brown with a few curls of burnt fur sticking out. Tom said we should bury it properly, just to get it out of sight, maybe, or maybe to shake the weirdness of the night off of us. I don't know. We scraped away a small patch of dirt behind the fire ring and scooped the body up with a stick. It was stiff now, curled into itself like a blackened shell. We didn't look at it long, just dropped it into the hole and covered it up. We didn't say anything like a prayer, didn't make jokes, just pressed the dirt down, stood there for a second, and then started breaking camp. But the weirdness didn't go away. I kept thinking about how fast it had been moving, how it ran with purpose. Not like it was lost, not like it was panicked, like it meant to do what it did. Moles don't run straight at fires. They're half blind, sensitive to vibrations, skittish. They burrow, hide, avoid light. They don't sprint through open space into heat and flame. And if it had been fleeing from something, wouldn't it have made noise in the woods for longer? Wouldn't there have been signs of a predator, something chasing it? But there had been nothing. Just those short rustles, then silence, then the sprint, then the fire. It didn't make sense. All 5 of us saw it. All of us heard it. And none of us had a good explanation. Even now, years later, I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. That moment in the middle of the night, the low fire, the crunching in the dark, the sudden motion, the way we stood there, too slow to stop it, watching something small and alive hurl itself into death. There's a lot in nature that doesn't make sense. Animals act strange. Weird things happen. But sometimes those moments feel like they're pointing at something bigger. Something we don't understand. I've camped plenty since then. Seen all kinds of animals. Woken up to coyotes. Watched a bobcat from 20 feet. Had raccoons rip through my food bag. But I've never seen anything like that mole again. and I still remember I don't really talk about this trip anymore. I used to, right after it happened, but people looked at me like I was either lying or making something up for shock value. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. I guess there's something about witnessing something so personal, something you were never supposed to see, that changes the way you carry certain memories. It happened a few years ago. I had been working a stressful job in the city. Long shifts, too much screen time, tight deadlines. My chest felt tight all the time, and I had this permanent tension in the back of my head like something bad was always about to happen. I didn't tell anyone, but I was close to breaking. Not in any dramatic way, I just didn't feel like I could think clearly anymore. I needed out, so I took time off and went camping. Just me, my gear, and the quiet. I picked a place up north I'd visited once before, Hollow Ridge Camp, a long stretch of forest with rough trails, quiet water, and no cell signal. I drove up there with enough supplies for 3 days, maybe 4, and parked at the old ranger station where the real road ended. From there, it was all forest road and hiking. I hiked about 4 miles in before setting up. I found a spot near a small creek, not far from an old fire ring someone had used years ago. It looked like nobody had been back there in a long time. That was what I wanted. The first day was uneventful. I walked the nearby trails, boiled water, set up camp. My tent was small but reliable, and the evenings were cool enough to make the fire feel necessary. I remember eating a bland bag of freeze-dried stroganoff and watching the flames flicker in the dark. I went to bed with that warmth still on my face. The second day, I hiked further in. There was a narrow, overgrown trail I hadn't noticed the first time I was here. It hooked to the west and dipped through some tight tree clusters. The trail wasn't marked, but I followed it anyway, curious. After about an hour, I came across another campsite. At first, I thought someone else was already camping there. I saw a tarp strung between 2 trees, a pile of wood near a pit, even a backpack leaning against a tree. I stopped and watched for a minute, unsure, but it felt abandoned. There was no movement, no gear spread out, no food, just that one tarp and the pack. I walked a little closer and called out. Nothing. Eventually, I stepped into the site. The fire pit looked used recently, cold but charred, and there was a metal mug next to it, turned over in the dirt. The tarp had started to sag. One of the ropes frayed and nearly snapped. Under the tarp was a blue foam pad and a sleeping bag, zipped up all the way. It looked like someone had just left and never came back. I didn't touch anything. Something about the place felt wrong. I turned around and hiked back out, sticking to the main trail as much as I could. I got back to my camp by late afternoon, and I didn't go exploring again that day. I kept the fire going later than usual that night. Felt safer with the light. The third day started with rain. Nothing too heavy, but it was enough to keep me close to camp. I sat under the tarp I had tied off and watched the water drip from the trees. The forest was quiet. No birds, no rustling, just the slow, steady patter of rain. Late that afternoon, I saw someone. I was collecting branches near the creek when I looked up and caught movement through the trees. It was a man, tall, thin, wearing a soaked gray jacket. He was maybe 40 yards off, walking slowly, head down. I froze. He didn't look like a hiker. He wasn't carrying anything, no pack, no water, nothing. He didn't seem to notice me. He just moved through the trees, toward the direction of the site I had seen the day before. I stood there until I couldn't see him anymore, until the forest swallowed him. Then I went back to camp. I didn't like the feeling in my chest. Something wasn't right. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the man. If he'd been camping there, why had he left his stuff behind? Was he in trouble? Was he watching me now? I thought about hiking out in the morning, maybe cutting my trip short. At dawn, I decided I had to go back. I don't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. I packed my gear but left the tent staked, thinking I'd come back before noon. I took my flashlight, just in case, and followed the same trail from 2 days earlier. The air was thick and still. My boots squished in the soft earth. When I reached the site again, I knew something had changed before I even saw it. The air felt heavier. The tarp was collapsed. The blue pad was gone. The backpack had been moved closer to the fire pit, and there, sitting against the tree, was the man. At first I thought he was resting. He was slouched slightly forward, his hands on his lap. But something was wrong with how still he was. His head tilted too far forward, chin almost to chest. I stepped closer, maybe 10 feet away, and that's when I saw the fire. Not burning, burned. The entire fire pit had been lit again, sometime in the night. There were ashes scattered in a wide ring, and a scorched log sitting to one side. And then I saw the hands. His palms were blackened, his fingers curled like claws. His skin looked cooked, blistered, melted in places. The front of his jacket was burned straight through, revealing a layer of flesh that had fused with melted fabric. He had lit himself on fire. I backed away, feeling my stomach lurch. I stumbled over a root and caught myself on a tree. I wanted to run, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. There was something so quiet about the scene. Not peaceful, more like the quiet of something horrible that's already happened. I forced myself to look away. I had to get help. I turned and started walking, fast, then running. I didn't stop until I got back to my site. I grabbed my pack and broke camp in a rush. Tent, food, gear. I stuffed everything into my bag without care. It took me nearly 4 hours to hike back to the ranger station. I didn't stop. I didn't drink water. I didn't even look behind me. I felt like I'd done something wrong just by being there. When I got to the station, it was closed. Just a faded sign and a dusty porch. I had to drive nearly 30 minutes before I found a gas station with a phone. I called the sheriff's office. The deputy on the line didn't say much. He just told me to wait. I sat outside on the curb until a cruiser pulled up. The deputy inside didn't look surprised by what I told him. They went back out there the next morning. I didn't go with them. I gave a full statement and a rough map of where the site was, but I didn't want to see it again. They found the body, confirmed suicide, said he poured fuel from his camp stove all over his chest and ignited it while sitting against the tree. He died from the burns before he could even move. They didn't find a note. I asked about the backpack. They said it had ID inside, a name, an address. He was from 3 states over. No missing persons report, no family looking. Just a man who went into the woods and decided that was where he'd end it. I left town the next day. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. The worst part, what still gets me sometimes, is how quiet it all was.
No screaming.
No signs. Just a man in the woods with too much time to think. He sat there, probably for hours, knowing exactly what he was going to do. And I saw him, alive, walking through the trees the day before. I wonder sometimes if he saw me too, if he thought about it, if he changed his mind for a second. I don't camp alone anymore. I don't stray off trail. I don't look into other people's campsites. There are things out there in the quiet that you're not meant to witness. And once you do, the silence never feels the same.